And the simple reason is when you sell a model of a license, you have to aggregate enough sets of features to be able to sell a license.
To resell the same thing.
Because 90% of what you're reselling is the same, right? And so it's very difficult for a typical software company to continue to add feature functionality because their business model is made on taking big enough bundles to force upgrades at certain, to deliver upgrades at certain periods of time. So the business model is getting in the way of delivering a constant stream of innovation that customers want. And it's second, these new models called cloud, which I want to come and talk about some context around that, do not work when you think about a traditional license model, pay up front. And I want to come back and talk a little bit about that in a second. But I just want to contrast that to the Red Hat model, right? The Red Hat model is to sell a subscription to a stream of innovation. All right? You don't buy a subscription to Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5 or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 4. You buy a subscription to Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and you get a stream of innovation, whether it's a major release, whether it's a minor release. Right? We aren't constrained on when we enable new functionality. Right? So yes, we come out with major releases, but that's around technical milestones around a specific kernel version and ABI compatibility, right? But whether when in RHEL 5.4 we delivered KVM, which is a breakthrough in virtualization. We didn't wait for a major release. But I think what's subtle but very, very important in that model is not just the fact that we can that we sell a subscription to stream of innovation, and therefore we can layer in innovation when it becomes available as fast as we can do it without the need to think about versions. Because we don't sell upgrades, we also don't put feature functionality that our customers don't need. And I think this is a very important point. There was a study done, and unfortunately in my jet lag stage, I'm going to forget the name, we can get back to the author, that looked at just to pick on a competitor because they're always fun to pick on, Microsoft. That looked at Microsoft Office 2008 running on a 2008 vintage piece of hardware versus Microsoft Office 2000 running on a 2000 vintage piece of hardware. Microsoft 2000 on a 2000 vintage piece of hardware was faster doing the same features as than 2008 running on 2008 vintage. And this there's a.
You're talking about servers in this case, right?
Well, no, I'm breaking out, but I'm using Office, so this is going back. I'm using it as an example of the concept of bloat. Though this happens in most pieces of software, and there's basically there's a guy's name I'm thinking in this article, but his law is that software gets slower more rapidly than hardware gets faster, right? And this gets into to bloat and what gets delivered in these large chunks. The typical software company, not doing anything wrong, they're trying to meet their customers' needs, aggregates the needs of 3 customers here and 5 customers there and 8 customers here and 12 customers there, throwing in to one mega version. And what happens when you do that and layer it into these big bulk is that 80% of the features of the typical piece of software are not used by the typical user, right? And so by doing these big mega releases that are trying to take more and more obscure functions and plugging into the software leads to massive overhead that's not needed by the typical customer. And just think of one recent customer. This was on the JBoss side, not on the Linux side. This is a Fortune 20 company, a massive, massive company. Decided to make a move from their proprietary WebLogic to JBoss. And after the deal was over, I was talking to the CTO about it. And his point back was, he said, frankly, it didn't matter what your subscription costs were. Frankly, it didn't matter what Oracle's WebLogic costs were. If we just looked at the amount of hardware and then the associated software running on those servers required to run WebLogic versus JBoss, it blew away any of the cost of the specific pieces of software. We were mainly running very lightweight kind of framework running on top of JBoss, and JBoss could just, the overhead to run it is so much lower. It made more sense to go that way. And so there is this issue of bloat, software getting slower, slower, slower. open source, because we don't get paid when there's a new version of software that comes out, we have no incentive to add feature functionality that are relatively esoteric for a few customers, right? Because a new release does not generate new revenue for Red Hat. I'm asked this all the time, often by analysts, sometimes by members of the press. Well, how much money are you going to make when Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 comes out, right? What's the, and so if you think about Microsoft, when Windows 7 came out, there's a huge spike in that quarter, or when a new version of Oracle database comes out, because they sell this huge upgrade. And my simple answer there is nothing. If you're a subscriber, you can download it and use it. But just as importantly, if you're not a subscriber, if you're a subscriber but you don't need the feature functionality, don't mess with it. Don't change out what you're running today. I've asked literally now probably 500 CIOs around the world this question. Have you ever been forced to upgrade to a new version of a piece of software that you could care less about? You didn't need any of the features or functionality, but you were forced to bear the integration costs and all the other things because your vendor was going to stop supporting the old version? Everyone nods. This is the model. You sell a version, 3 or 4 years later you sell a new version, 3 or 4 years later you sell a new version. Because that's the revenue stream. Our revenue stream, because it's a subscription, we never force people to upgrade. Now, we have a 7 years after the next version. It's roughly a 10-year life, because at some point after 10 years, it's supporting 3 customers on a really old version just gets expensive for us. But because it's not a revenue stream for us, we never force an upgrade on our customers. If you are a subscriber to RHEL, you want 4, you want 5, you want 6 when it comes out, you can pick whatever version you want. You can choose to upgrade, you can choose not to. It's a subscription, which the way I articulate it is a subscription to a stream of innovation. It's not a subscription to a specific piece of software. And that's a fundamental, subtle difference, but it allows us to deliver a much more rapid stream of innovation for our customers than is typical with software. And if you go all the way back to RHEL, 8 years ago, RHEL 2, and if you subscribe to RHEL 2 and you've continued to subscribe, you've gotten a massive stream of innovation, from SE Linux to virtualization to clustering, global file system. You can go on and on and on and on with the feature functionality that it added. And if you're a subscriber, the incremental cost has been 0. And so it's a fundamental different model. And I think, and this gets a very, very important point around cloud and our view of cloud. And let me spend a minute on that, because I think it's impossible to be in technology and not use the word cloud at least 50 times in a speech. But let me provide a little bit of context on cloud, and then specifically talk about Red Hat. Now I'm going to stop talking, because so far none of you asked me questions, so I'm going to stop in a minute, and it's your turn to pepper me.